Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Island families. We hope you enjoy this evening's edition.
Welcome to Labor Vision, a production of the Rhode Island Institute for Labor Studies and Research. My name is Hammond, Workforce Labor Liaison at the Institute, and joining us tonight is Paul Valletta of the Rhode Island State Association of Firefighters and State Senator Frank Lombardi. Thank you so much for being here, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So it was a busy week, as I can remember last week in the Senate, for bills that are important to firefighters in Rhode Island. There was both the continuing contract bill and the overtime bill. Can you explain why both of these bills were so important?
Go ahead, Senator. Thank you. Well, I think we've come back now from the spring session. A lot of bills will now get the attention that they rightfully deserve. These are two, historically, have always been two very important bills. Labor Committee is now starting to gear up. We'll be meeting on a weekly basis now for all the important bills, but particularly these two bills that pertain to public safety and our firefighters.
Do you have any?
Yes, and they're important to us because with contract continuation, many of the clauses in our collective bargaining agreements have to do with safety, ladder testing, the kind of gear they have to buy us, and things like that. The monetary issues, while important, the safety issues are equally important to us. And with the contract continuation, we're afraid that historically the municipalities have honored contracts, but now we're starting to see where some are taking the stand when the contract expires, if another one hasn't been negotiated yet, that they can start cutting these things. And we're very concerned about that. As far as the 42-hour bill, we just want to be paid like everybody else in the country. If we have to work overtime, if you want to force us into these terrible shifts, we'll work them, but you have to pay us for them.
Absolutely. And Senator Lombardi, you're a sponsor on both of these bills, so you must have found that both of them were necessary.
Absolutely, and they're unlike most labor contract bills. There's always a dollars and cents argument against them.
Yep.
These are more, I see, as public safety issues. I really do. And particularly with my bill that I'm the prime sponsor on, the overtime bill, the concern there is to make sure that we've got fresh firefighters going out doing their job as public safety people every single day in a fresh way. With the continuing contract thing, I think we saw a little bit of that in North Kingston that prompted the Supreme Court case in North Kingston, where our Supreme Court has said that there are certain things that municipalities can do that are deemed to be management rights, and they unilaterally take certain things away from firefighters at the cost and at the risk of working more hours on extended periods of time, and therefore being exhausted and making public safety concerns.
And there in North Kingstown, this is kind of where this overtime bill started, when they moved up to 56 hours?
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And then now it's moving, right? It moved to Tiverton, Central, Coventry, and Providence.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Providence
is not.
Providence
is
they,
not.
they were put in it,
Okay.
and then they negotiated and they came out of it, but the city of Providence had to pay millions of dollars to the firefighters because it was an illegal shift to the shift.
And now the Supreme Court ruling for this, Senator, it was never stated that these hours weren't negotiable, even though some town officials are trying to claim that it was now?
It's kind of a strange decision because what it said was that platooning was a management decision, and that's a management right, and therefore not a arbitrable situation. But hours are.
Right.
So I don't know how you can address platooning without addressing hours. And so there was that. So there's a gap there. There seems to be a disconnect between the two. And the North Kingston case stood for the proposition that the town manager or the municipal government leader there in North Kingston could unilaterally change the platoon system of the firefighters. But the question about hours remained silent in that decision.
And as for the municipalities that are currently in these continued contract agreements, right? How will this implementation affect them? How will they be affected?
So presently there are only 3 out of the 32 paid fire departments in the state of Rhode Island. There are 3 departments that do it: Central, Coventry, Fire District, Tiverton, and North Kingstown. We put into the bill because we didn't want any municipality to have to go into this right away without having some time to implement it. So we put in the bill, if there's a collective bargaining agreement in place, that if you're in the 56-hour work week, that stays in effect till the expiration of that contract. Now, Central Coventry Fire District, I believe, has 2 more years left on their contract. So that stays in effect. Their 56 hours stays in effect. This gives Central Coventry time. They know in 2 years they have to go to the 42-hour work week. With Tiverton and North Kingstown, they're currently in contract negotiations. So if they sign an agreement prior, whatever they negotiate, if they negotiate 56 hours for the next 3 years, then that stays in place. We wanted to build that in. We didn't want a municipality to have to jump right into this.
Right. And now, I know that we have a little bit of time. Would you be able to go into detail a little bit more about the overtime bill? Some of the things that are in place, or that will be put in place in this overtime bill. How are kind of firefighters being taken advantage of, I would say, not being able to be like everyone else and at the 42 hours, now they get overtime, right?
Well, firefighters presently, most of us work 42-hour work weeks. We all do, except for those 3 communities. We work an average of 48 hours a week. That's what we all work. We don't get paid 8 hours overtime over the 40 every week. We don't even, now even though our contracts say we get paid overtime after 42 hours, we don't even include those 6 extra hours. So we work 48 hours, we know we're not getting overtime for that extra time, and that's the way it's always been. The big thing they say about, the naysayers say about the Senator's bill is it's going to cost millions of dollars for communities. It's not going to cost a penny to anybody. Everybody who's in 42 hours stays in 42 hours. Even some of the mayors who have come out on this bill have come out against it. Not for the fact it's going to cost them money, because they all admit that it's not going to cost them money because they're in 42 hours. It's not going to cost their municipalities anything.
Right.
It really is, their argument is it's a leverage tool. That's what they're saying now. But you know, tools in the hands of wrong people that don't know how to use them is a dangerous thing. And when they talk about leverage, I don't agree with that. I don't think that holding a terrible shift, a dangerous shift over our heads that impacts not only our safety, but impacts our family life. Imagine telling your spouse, if you're in one of these shifts, you leave for work Monday morning, I'll be back Wednesday night. Imagine telling your spouse that. Good luck with the kids, taking them to all the games and everything. And we've seen where departments that have gone into these shifts, it has affected the family life. So I'm not even, I don't agree with them that having that, holding that sword over our head to put us into these terrible shifts will bring us to the table. I don't see that as bargaining in good faith either.
For me, it's an even simpler task. In my real life, I'm a lawyer, and I think it's a question of fundamental fairness. I mean, if you worked for me as a 40-hour-a-week employee, and I required you to work 50 hours a week, then I'm mandated by law to pay you time and a half. Now, I fully understand that there's some federal laws that suggest that firefighters and police officers ought to be treated a little differently. But this is, I think, the ultimate compromise in fairness. What Paul said is completely accurate. You know, I spent hours and hours trying to educate myself on what a platoon was and what hours are set up, and you really, and I'm, you know, I'm an accounting major, so numbers don't scare me, but you have to look at it on an annual basis. And basically, in a nutshell, these firefighters in a 42-hour work week city are working 48 hours a week, but they're not going to get the overtime on that. They're only going to get the overtime based on 42. They're already giving up 6 hours a week of overtime. So it's not, so when you get, and not to name names, but when you, Mayor Policina is a strict conservative mayor in the town of Johnston. When he comes out, and when Mayor Lombardi in North Providence, who's of a similar ilk, comes out and states that they rather pay the overtime than hire new firefighters, I think that is indicative of how fundamentally fair this bill is. Put the firefighters on equal footing with all other employees.
Right, absolutely. And as for the continuing contract bill, upon passage, what does this mean for firefighters?
It really doesn't change anything.
Okay.
For the municipalities, although the Firefighters Arbitration Act has strict timeline guidelines that we have to follow. The argument for the continuing contract is we'll never sit down and negotiate. We don't have that luxury with the Firefighters Arbitration Act. We have to notify them. Most of our contracts run out in the end of June. We have to notify the city in February. We want to negotiate. They have to meet with us within 10 days, and negotiations have to start within that period. Then we have 30 days to negotiate. If we don't reach a contract, we have 30 days to do the arbitration. Now, both parties can extend that, and normally we do, because there's been very few arbitrations in the state of Rhode Island. We normally can get a contract. But with the contract continuation, we won't be able to stand on our contract after it expires. We'll have that negotiated or arbitrated long before that happens. So that argument doesn't hold water.
And you know, I query any of my constituents that are critical of my submission of any of these bills to ask themselves a very simple question. Do you want that firefighter that's been on the job for 36 hours to be the one coming to your house in, God forbid, a massive fire or a critical emergency at your house, rather than having a fresh firefighter working his regular hours?
Absolutely.
And I think that's a fair question to ask.
It becomes a health and safety issue.
It most definitely does.
Right.
On both ends, for the firefighter and the people we serve.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
So how are we feeling about these bills?
Well, I'm very confident. I mean, you obviously, it'll go to the Labor Committee on April 24th. Labor Committee typically will hear the bills, not necessarily rule on them, because I like the way the Senate does things. The Senate hears, listens, absorbs, and then has a second hearing for consideration. That will probably happen. I think it'll be a lengthy hearing, but I think most definitely you will see both of these bills back for consideration at the Labor Committee level, and then on the Senate floor.
Thank you.
Man, I just think with the 42-hour bill, you say to most people that even if they're not firefighters, do you think people should be paid over 40 hours? Most people would say yeah, because they want to be paid over 40 hours.
Right.
You can't have one and not the other. So
Why do anything different?
We're hopefully optimistic this year.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, do either of you have anything else to add for this?
No, I'm just, I'm happy to fight the fight for the firefighters. Sometimes we have to put in legislation that gets newsworthy, that makes headlines. I guess, it's sexiness sells, I guess. And if it's not controversial, it doesn't make the papers. This is obviously something that's newsworthy. I have absolutely no qualms about being out in the forefront of it, and I'm confident that these bills should pass for the public safety, not only of my Cranston constituents, but all of the state of Rhode Island.
Now, can individuals still submit testimony
Absolutely.
if they're unable to get to the hearing?
Absolutely, they can submit written testimony, or alternatively, they can show up and make. Well, they certainly can email us at any time, and they do. But also they can appear at the meeting.
We're just about out of time. I want to thank you both so much for being here again, taking the time out of your days. I know you have busy lives, so thank you very much. And thank you everyone for tuning in. My name is Erica Hammond. You're watching Labor Vision. Have a great night.
Hi, you're watching Labor Vision, a production of the Rhode Island Institute for Labor Studies and Research. I'm Thom from the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. Today with us we have State Senator Sandra Cano, and we'll be talking about the upcoming census. Hi, Senator. Thanks for coming in today to talk about the census. Can you tell our viewers a little about the census, what it is, when do we do it, and why it's so important?
Thank you so much, Thom. First, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about such an important issue like the census. The census is officially the count of the population of our nation, and it happens every 10 years. And it is important because it gets tied to many things such as resources for the federal government, and also our representation in Congress. So depending of our population and how we count people, then we have a designation of congressional seats to represent us at the national level. And the funding is important because depending of how many people we have in a state such as Rhode Island, then that is dedicated allocated funding that comes to support housing, health, SNAP programs for children. So there's many, many things that come into place when it comes to the census. So every 10 years it happens, and we will have our census in 2020, so it's a year from now, and it will be April 1st, 2020. Everybody should remember that day.
Okay, and so next year around this time, it'll be taking place. What's at stake in the 2020 census?
Well, it is important that we recognize that we have to count everybody in order to retain a congressional seat in our state, but also $3.1 billion get allocated to Rhode Island for a year, 10-year period.
Okay.
So it would be around $3 million per year, which is a lot of good resources that again goes towards our family's support when it comes to school, education, health. So there is a lot of things that are at stake if we don't count everybody in Rhode Island.
All right. Okay, so everybody needs to be counted is basically what needs to be done. And what is different about the census that's upcoming next year?
So the first time that we will have an online census will be next year. So the Census Bureau is trying to ask everybody to fill out the formulary online. So that is very different from years before. I think that it's important that everybody recognize that everybody in Rhode Island has access to online to be able to fill out that questionnaire. So we need to work together to make sure that the census gets filled out by everybody and that we could get resources available for people to be able to have online access to get to fill it out. Now, I understand also that if you, it's 5 attempts. It's 5 attempts that you get.
Okay.
So if you don't get by the 3rd attempt, if you don't get a questionnaire filled out online, then they will send you a paper one. Okay. But the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to try for you to fill out a questionnaire online.
All right. So nobody will be knocking on your door.
Well, they're trying to knock at your door, but that is just the last resource.
Okay.
And they're not putting a lot of money into people on the streets to do that, like they did in years before, because the resources were cut down from the federal level for the census. So we are doing the census in 2020 with the same resources we had in 2010. So if you think about it, that is the reason why they're doing the online.
Better use of resources.
Exactly.
Okay, so, and this year we also have the question of citizenship on the census. What's the deal with that?
Well, that is an important question. I think that due to the current environment in Washington, D.C., a lot of our residents in Rhode Island feel uncomfortable filling out that question. So right now, there is still a case in the courts waiting to be resolved to see if that question will indeed be in the census for 2020. Let's put the scenario that it will be in the census. So what happens? I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm also a proud immigrant. I could just leave that question blank, and the federal government has to count me in. That doesn't mean that they could share your information because the census is confidential.
Right.
So I would suggest that even though there is a lot of fear in the community, and even though people are scared of what would happen with that information of whether or not you are a citizen, we'll just leave that question blank, and you still get counted. That is my suggestion, and that is what I will do as a citizen of the United States.
Right. So that is a viable option. You can just leave that question blank.
That is one. Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Recently, there was a rally at the State House last week, right? How did that go?
It went very well. I think that what we're trying to do with the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee, which is a group that the governor put in effect in an executive order in December of 2018, and we started meeting in February. this group got together with many businesses, the labor community, the community-based organizations, to bring awareness that a year from last week, it will be Census Day. So what we did was we had a rally. We also had a resolution both in the Senate and in the House to pass this resolution to make sure that every Rhode Islander know that it's officially Census Action Day, a year from April 1st. So it's awareness, education, and it was important to highlight what needs to happen from now until then. We need to have a strategy to outreach and to make sure that we count every Rhode Islander. We also need resources for that. So I'd like to give you a little detail of what we had so far. So the governor had appropriated in the budget $150,000 for census strategy. The Rhode Island Complete Count Committee had identified that we need $1.2 million to make sure that we count every Rhode Islander, at least $1.2 million. The Rhode Island Foundation graciously came in and already put aside $250,000 to this outreach, which we are very grateful with the efforts of the Rhode Island Foundation, which means that we are trying to advocate for $350,000 more from our General Assembly, and that's what we try to do. After the rally, we had a Senate Finance Committee hearing for the census. It went very well. The senators were very diligent in asking questions of where this money is going to go and why do we need this money. And I think that it was very not only informative, but it was a good way of educating everybody that this is something that we cannot let behind. This should be a priority for all, and we should all work together towards that goal of counting everybody, because currently we have 24% of our population in Rhode Island as hard to count communities. Oh. So that is important. That percentage is a little high, and then so we need to make sure that we get to all of those communities.
All right. Well, you pretty much answered my next two questions. That were basically, what is the state doing to get ready for the census, and is there money in the state budget for the census? So
the process of the money in the state budget hasn't been finalized yet.
Okay.
We still have a lot of work to do. Okay. I think that we have a start with the $150,000 that the governor had put aside towards these strategy efforts, but we also are very conscious that we need to raise the allocation of state funding to $500,000, that's what we're asking, mm-hmm. But we also need to raise the other $700,000, which out of that, $250,000 had been allocated from the Rhode Island Foundation. So we still need private businesses, other foundations to come and help us get that money so we could get to that $1.2 million to make sure that we outreach to that hard to count communities.
Any other nonprofits or anybody else, any other interested parties come forward yet to say that they're interested in donating?
Sure. In the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee, we have the United Way of Rhode Island. We have the Champlain Foundation. So we're all working together towards the same goal. It's a matter of getting to that number and making sure that we do the pledge and allocate that money to make sure we get to that $1.2 million.
All right. You mentioned hard to count communities. What would you consider those to be?
So that could be from the range of low-income communities, seniors, young people, immigrants, or the minority community. That is what we call hard to count communities. And believe it or not, we do have very spread out hard communities around the state. Yes. It's not located in one city. We do have all across our state, and we need to make sure we get to them. Remember, seniors don't have access to the internet. They know, and they don't trust so many of the people nowadays.
My mom.
So it is important that we take the responsibility of helping, working maybe with the housing authorities to make sure that they do know that this information is safe and help them through the process. We need resources for that, and that is why it's so critical.
Now, it was also mentioned to me that college kids around, especially around URI, around campuses like Roger Williams and Bryant,
Right.
are areas that those kids can be counted because they're residents 9 months a year. They use our resources, and those are areas that we should concentrate on as well.
Absolutely. That's why we do have a lot of our education institutions on the table as the hard count, as the complete count committee meets every month. We make sure that the message is there and everybody gets the same message. And then the next step of this is the strategy to make sure that we get to those students, to make sure that we have people going on campus, doing workshops, doing whatever it takes to make sure that everybody fills out that census questionnaire.
Fantastic. What can our union members do to help with the census taking?
I think that is a very important question. I believe that awareness is the most important thing. Not a lot of people realize that census is coming in 2020, and if you take the time to tell your family members, your friends, and then we do that as we continue to bring the awareness and the education, it's going to be easier for people to realize that that is important. It is also very crucial to know that this is the first time in 2 decades that we have a census during a presidential election. So that is also important. Why? Because civic engagement could be a way of getting people to be aware that the census is at the same time that our presidential election is coming. So we need to tie the message somehow. The other important issue that I believe for most of the people just bring the awareness factor is that this could be the first time since 1789 that we could lose a congressional seat.
Yes.
The first time since 1789. So that is important for all Rhode Islanders to know. We don't want to have less representation in Washington for our state.
No.
If anything, we want to retain and keep our seat. And I do know that it's important that we all work together to get that done. So I think it's important that we continue the awareness and education, Thom.
Okay. Now, is there a web page or someplace we can get information out to people so they're more aware of what they need to do?
Thank you. I think that right now the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee is working on a web page through the Department of Administration, where you can find all the resources. I don't have that web page yet, but it is soon to come. So I think it's important that we'll get that message when it's available to us.
Okay, you get that to me, and we'll get that out to our people. And thank you for coming in today. This has been extremely informative, and we will get this out to our members. And thanks for coming on. Thank you for watching Labor Vision, and have a good night.
Thank you, Thom.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.